Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another week of our spread election 2020 events. Today, we are covering Proposition 24, which amends consumer privacy laws. Most people have already turned in most of their ballots, so that's good. But we're going to knock it out and see if we can have any interesting conversations or ideas about these three propositions here. This proposition is a big one because it does a lot of things, a lot of different things here and there. Background is that businesses, and increasingly more and more businesses, of course, collect a ton of data about our preferences, our choices, what we buy, what we see, what content we like. They use this data and they sell it, they analyze it in order to provide a more personalized experience, keep your attention, and ultimately, make a profit for themselves. Current law, which was most recently passed and signed into law in 2018, currently imposes data privacy requirements on certain businesses that generally earn more than $25 million in revenue, buy, sell, or share data of 50,000 or more people, and earn more than half of their revenue from selling personal data. Current law requires these companies, when they are collecting their data, and inform them how they intend to use it. Current law says they must comply with data privacy rights. Currently, people can request free reports about how companies are using their data. They can also request that businesses delete their data, and people are allowed to tell businesses to not sell their personal data. And under the 2018 regulations, which are currently in effect, businesses cannot treat people who make use of their rights differently. They cannot charge, for example, different prices or different services to people who invoke their data rights. Businesses can encourage people to let them collect and sell their data by offering discounts, etc. Currently, only the California Department of Justice can impose and enforce penalties when the companies violate these rules. And current law says that businesses must take steps to prevent data breaches, inform people if their data was accessed during these breaches, and people can seek penalties if businesses do not respond to violations within 30 days. So what will this proposition do? It will change. It does a lot of things. One of the things it does is it changes which businesses must meet data privacy requirements. Overall, it will reduce the number of businesses that are regulated by California's data privacy laws. How does it do that? Well, it changes the threshold from buying, selling, or sharing the data of 100,000. Prior it was 50,000. Now the threshold is 100,000. And it also no longer counts devices, meaning before it counted individuals, households, and devices under that 50,000 count. And now it no longer count devices. So in effect, this will target bigger companies that have bigger customers, and in effect, it will not cover these kind of medium-sized businesses or even small businesses if you consider the fact that data is such a huge product in today's market. Almost, all these companies that are tech related or even have like a sign up function on their websites will fall under this if they have 100,000 or more consumers. It changes data privacy requirements. It requires businesses to inform consumers of the length of time that they intend to keep the data, but it also removes some requirements, including allowing businesses to refuse to delete information. So a consumer can ask them, hey, please delete my information. I don't want you to hold on to it. Under this new thing, it will allow them to refuse to do that under specific conditions. It names new data rights, saying people can now ask businesses to do more or to follow more restrictions with their data. And you can ask them to not share data with other companies. You can ask them to take reasonable efforts to correct data that's incorrect. And it limits businesses' use of sensitive data, such as social security numbers, your health information, logins, and passwords. Changes updates penalties. It imposes a harsher penalty for violations of these policies if it regards people under 16 years old. Also requires a more proactive stance by businesses in the context of data breaches. For example, it is harder to avoid penalties um, previously within 30 days, and they would be able to avoid some penalties. This new legislation would not allow them to kind of have that loophole, and instead they would simply be penalized if they were found, in violation of the penalty, whether or not they fixed it within 30 days. Okay, and now I mentioned the enforcement part of that. It was prior to this, it was only the Department of Justice that could enforce the law, conduct investigations, and whatnot. This one would create a brand new agency that functions by itself to investigate these things. Department of Justice will also be able to if they wanted to. And the last thing is about the money collected. If it does collect fines from businesses, it restricts the use of funds. It says that 91% of extra funds, extra meaning after it pays for the court cases and the prosecutions and all this stuff, extra funds should be invested, and 9% of the extra funds should be toward privacy education. So it does a lot of things, and general comments on this is that because it does so many things, this is actually a controversial proposition, because a lot of the privacy groups, a lot of the prominent privacy groups, including the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the ACLU, a bunch of other ones that I'm not too familiar with that are very reputable and credible, there's actually a lot of disagreement, and they're split pretty evenly on whether to support this or not. Let me move on. The fiscal impact. There will be an increase of at least $10 million annually in, I should have been more clear, in costs for the state in order to pay for a brand new agency. There will also be an increase in costs for the increased court activity, and Department of Justice workload will probably increase. Some or all of these costs may be paid by the penalties collected. And there will be an unknown impact because businesses will have to adjust and just adjust their operations based on how to comply. Voting yes on this would mean a bunch of changes to consumer privacy that we've just mentioned and that we will discuss in a second. And voting no would mean things stay the same. Okay, let's look at a few arguments here. So the first argument in favor is that the government needs to regulate the use of data better, simply because of the changing, technological landscape that we all grew up with. It says that there is a clear need for government to regulate data and the use of data better. More privacy protections are necessary in this age of data and information. There should be a new agency started. That would start the path of better data regulation, where regulating data would not just be like a subset or small task of law enforcement. It would be its own agency because it deserves to be its own agency because it's such a big topic. I mentioned Facebook and other big companies, Google, Amazon, all these other ones that hold actually a lot of power due to the immense data they have, and they often know more about your online activities than you are aware of. So that's the argument here, that there needs to be more government activity in this space, and harsher penalties are also beneficial in order to try to balance the power curve here. The next argument is that this proposition will expand consumer rights and the types of requests that consumers can make of these businesses. I mentioned correcting incorrect information, protecting sensitive data better, and a few other things that I don't remember. And really quickly, against why we should not vote in favor of Proposition 24. One of the main things is that Proposition 24 allows businesses to charge more if people opt out of having their data sold. This is a compromise with the tech companies, essentially trading truer privacy protection for political capital. Policy that seeks to protect privacy above all else would not allow any room for businesses based on consumers' privacy choices. So I looked into the legal text of this, and one of the statements it says is that I forgot the exact statement, but it leaves room explicitly. It says none of this shall prohibit a business. I should probably just look it up later on. But the point is that it leaves space, and it doesn't say that companies must not manipulate pricing based on consumer preferences of privacy, but it leaves room for them to do that. And so this is one of the proponents' main arguments against this policy, because what you'll probably see is when the businesses is able and have some legal cover to encourage people to sell their data, they will use their position to make that happen. For example, if they're able to charge maybe a few dollars more per month on a subscription fee, if you check the box to say share your data, most of the people that will sell their data are those that are less well off, and so this causes an imbalance between the people who can afford privacy versus people who might not be able to afford privacy. So this is an argument based on economic equity, I would say. We'll get back to this. Let's run through these other arguments against. This argument against the proposition is that it puts the burden on the consumer to opt out of data collection practices instead of mandating opt-in data schemes. So the default setting, if you go to any of these big websites, is that they will collect the data and you have to opt out. So some proponents of data privacy that are critics of this proposition says, it just doesn't go far enough. We should instead make the companies ask us for an explicit yes before they even begin collecting data. So this argument says that this bill is too much of a compromise, and it doesn't help. Argument number 3, this one says that it allows businesses to refuse consumers' requests to delete data. So the criticism here is that the language is too broad and it gives too much room for businesses. And the quoted line from the actual law says that a business could refuse when it believes retention would help to ensure security and integrity. So it allows businesses to make the case that holding on to this data will improve our security systems, improve our security policy, and this will ultimately benefit all the customers. Also mentioned is it diminishes a business's duty to transmit a consumer's deletion request to downstream entities who got that consumer's data from that business. Specifically, a business could refuse if doing so required disproportionate effort. So I'll pause there. That line says if, for example, you give your data to company A and company A gives your data, it passes it along to maybe one of its subcontractors or what have you, company B, you could ask company A to delete your data and they might comply, but they have no obligation to, or they could refuse to ask company B to also delete your data if they're saying that it is a disproportionate effort. So critics again say, why does it have to be on the consumer? The consumer doesn't have the time to chase down these entities and ask them to delete their data. And from their point of view, it says if you had to choose whether to put the onus on corporations or individuals, it would probably be more effective to ask the big corporations to do it because they have, full-time staff that would be doing this. And that would better achieve your goal of privacy rights and controlling your data. And according to the Electric Frontier Foundation, this legislation doesn't give you a private avenue to sue corporations. Instead, you'd have to rely on this new agency that's being created, and there are some concerns with that. Whether or not that you pursue your claim and see your complaint through to the end. So this lack of private right to sue companies is concerning for critics of this bill. Really quick rebuttal to argument one, which was the argument was that there is a great need to regulate companies that collect so much data from us. A rebuttal is simply that there isn't that great of a need. Things are okay as they are, and maybe you don't even control or own your data after you release it to the companies willingly, and that point can be argued. The next rebuttal says that it expands, the proposition expands voter rights, but this counter argument says that you shouldn't have such rights over the personal data that you voluntarily gave up. Another way to discredit this argument is that it doesn't go far enough in expanding voter rights, and among all the other things it does, therefore, you shouldn't vote in favor of this bill because it concedes too much to the companies. And finally, this is extra. Finally, some rebuttals against arguments against. I actually don't think there's anything here. Cool. Let's discuss this. I think let's start by having whoever already turned in their ballots, maybe tell us how you voted on this, if you're comfortable with that, and why you lean that way.
Sure, I can start. So I voted yes on this. Even so, I think I actually didn't do as much research as everything that Steven said. So there's a lot of things I learned from what Steven said. However, like even with all those things that were brought up, I still think I'm still gonna lean yes on this prop, mainly because the tech field is highly unregulated, and I think that if we delay the regulation even further, it'll just allow these businesses to continue to doing what they're doing. And yes, there are those loopholes that Steven mentioned earlier, but I think those could be addressed later. I think there at least needs. I think there makes sense to have at least start up an agency to sort of begin finding ways to regulate these tech industries. And I'm leaning towards this because I'm also most recently watched The Social Dilemma, and I think The Social Dilemma is a really good like documentary to sort of shed light on how sort of in a lot of ways immoral these tech companies are. And so I think that even though there are some bad details about this prop, I think it's worth pushing for, because at least we get started somewhere, because this is a completely new realm, right? Like we never regulated the tech industry. So I think this is a step in the right direction. Granted, I still think some of those details aren't the best, but I think that making it like more regulation on tech is a good idea.
Maybe, hey, in like 30 seconds or less, can you sum up the gist of the social dilemma? Because I didn't see that one yet.
Oh, that one, basically it's all these big, like all these like people that worked for like these big companies before, like Facebook, YouTube, or Facebook and Google specifically, or mainly Facebook and Google. They all previously worked for them, and they came back and talked about how like if at some point it didn't feel as though they were making the company very ethical, because at some point they were really focusing on how to get these people addicted to their product, and trying to find ways to get people to come back to it in that way.
Yeah, I saw, I forgot the name of it, but it was a similar documentary, like I think it was like 3 years old, just talking about, it was about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook's role in the 2016 election, and not just in America, but in, I don't know if you guys heard, like there was like an actual genocide that was uh, propagated. Yeah, we saw the Great Hack, but recently there's like genocidal activity that was propagated through social media, and um, that's very concerning that no one's regulating that. Of course, that's an international incident, but it just goes to show how easily people are influenced by social
How do you
media, and of course they're and,
Oh,
yeah.
sorry, I cut
Oh,
you
go
off.
ahead. Exactly.
I'm just wondering about, like, does anyone know about the 2018 Consumer Privacy Act? Apparently, I didn't know this, but apparently there's like an existing law passed in 2018 to regulate the consumer, I guess to regulate this, and this is just like part two of it, or
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't know the details, but so there's two individuals that were like huge, like whatever, like nonprofit leaders or whatever in the field of data privacy, and they worked super hard to get that 2018 law passed. And the interesting thing about this proposition specifically is those individuals right now they're on both sides of this. So one's opposing it and one's for it. They had a falling out, even though they're theoretically fighting for the same thing. And I mean, that's just the story with this proposition where like very reputable organizations like the ACLU, like that's not somebody to mess with, right? They're against this. And that's something that gave me like a lot of pause. Because on the other hand, everything Bowden said is true. I also want a full-time agency on this. Andrew Yang endorses this, and I like Andrew. So like all these things, it makes it not the easiest decision for sure. Um, I do definitely agree that there's always a future. We could always fix what's broken, and I have general faith in the current California politics that if it goes, it's on their agenda again, they're not gonna screw it up too badly. Um, so I don't know. Which way are you leaning on the side of people, or have you had another point, Carmen?
Was this law proposed by a politician, or was it proposed by a company, or was it proposed by a individual?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer to that right away. I know that one of the things with the crafting of this law was that some organizations were, I guess, not invited to the table in drafting this, while there were discussions with the big tech companies to, discuss what would be maybe feasible or, you know what I mean? So there's that politics where it's like, hey, we're going to write this whole big law that will, redefine consumer privacy. But, instead of talking to this nonprofit, we went and talked to Facebook and Microsoft. And interestingly enough, they're not spending a whole lot of money, if any, opposing this. So some people are suspicious. They're like, okay, so some deal was reached, behind some closed doors that made the legislation not as tough, not as restrictive on their activities in exchange, probably, right? Because it's a negotiation. In exchange for those little, they're not really loopholes or whatever, you call them whatever you want. But like I said, it doesn't, the criticism is that if it was truly about consumer privacy, you wouldn't really allow corporations to change prices. Um, so yeah. Um, Andy, Jackie, any thoughts on this? Did you guys vote already on this, or what are you thinking? If you're driving, don't answer. It's cool. Feel free to respond.
Uh, Sorry. Yeah, I voted yes on it, and I had the same reason with voting actually. actually having someone in the government to specialize in privacy. I also watched the show to the another. Oh, I think I don't have a signal.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I'll lean toward voting yes, just because on the idea that we can fix what's broken in the future. Let's get something started. Even though those concerns are very real concerns that the opposition had. Andy, you got something?
Yeah.
No, I haven't voted on this one yet, but after listening, I feel like getting something started is important. But I heard that you have to pay for this service through your internet provider. Like it's an extra cost that they'll tack on to your bill.
I didn't know about that. I wonder how they would actually put that in place.
Pay for privacy?
Yeah, because Andy was saying that you would need to go to your internet provider in order to opt out of them using your sensitive information. That's at least what I've understanding. Is that correct, Andy?
I think I could be totally butchering it, but I think I was in a car ride with Jackie one time, and he told me about this prop, and it says that if you are to, I guess, opt out or opt in, it would be a separate fee that you pay to keep your information safe.
Yeah. Yeah. You might. I'm not sure it would be a fee to your utility provider. I mean your internet provider. My understanding, I think it would probably be from individual businesses because, for example, right now when you go on websites, a result of that 2018 law was that I don't know if you guys noticed, there's more things popping up asking for your permission about data or cookies or something, and that's from each and every entity that collects your data. So it's not, not necessarily Comcast collects your data for Facebook. It's Facebook individually collecting data. And so all your individual relationships with every company, they all have to follow the rules and ask you for permission on such things. And each of those entities, they could say, hey, you're paying for Netflix, cool. It's $9 a month. If you want to share more data with us, we'll make it $8.50, right? And so that's what people are foreseeing will happen in the future, since that is allowed. And the worry is that, of course, if you're rich, you'll for sure, okay, 50 cents, a month, that's nothing. But if you're poor, okay, I have to sell my data, so I have to save a little money. And so that's the concern. Yeah, Alistair McTaggart, he is one of the guys. I forgot the name of the other person, but they worked together to pass that 2018 one, and now they're fighting each other, which is pretty interesting.
Spicy.
Yeah. Anyone have any more thoughts on this proposition? No. Alrighty, why don't we go ahead and move on to the next proposition here.